Welcome to Prose Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by emerging writers for emerging writers, because sometimes we feel like prose and sometimes we feel like cons. For long-time listeners, and I'm talking like a year back into our catalogue, you may remember an episode that I hosted on creativity and talking about the neuroscience of creativity and what the brain does when we're in the zone. And what we thought we would do today is host a special NaNoWriMo episode, getting everyone set up for NaNoWriMo in November. But it's a good excuse to revisit the creativity episode, because those are fun questions that I would love to re-ask some of our Precipice here, and also ask the questions of those who missed that episode. So I would love to go around the room and we can introduce ourselves. I'm Ali Burnham. I'm a screenwriter who also dabbles in prose, and my day job is I work at Westwards, where we program creative writing workshops and teach and help emerging writers enter the industry. So this NaNoWriMo workshop was something I hosted a couple of days ago, so it was an excellent opportunity to dust it off and bring it to you all in podcast form. Going around the tiles, Phoenix, let us know who you are and why you're here.
I'm here because I met all these nice people a little while ago. We started talking about writing. No, but my name's, well, literally, yes, that is why. But my name is Phoenix, and I'm a freelance editor, founder of Bentlight Writing. And what that is we're a collective of authenticity/sensitivity readers, and just trying to help bring that extra grain of authenticity to the page in various stories. So that's a project I'm getting off the ground right now. Yeah, if you're looking for me online, fun fact, I found this out today. I am on Ozlit, which is the first time I've experienced myself being populated on the internet that I didn't have a hand in putting myself in. Like, I just exist there. And I'm like, oh, I don't even have access to this information. They request I subscribe. So that was a cool moment. I'm like, oh, look.
Someone else is profiling you. Yes, no, and yes. I tried to connect the dots, and I suspect it was because the new Mythic was shortlisted for the Aurealis Awards, and you and Matan specifically were nominated, so that's why you two have profiles on Ozlit. So congratulations.
Yeah. Fun moment for me today.
Alex, who are you?
Yes, my name is Alex Eldridge. I am a writer of both horror and more recently sort of a literary and commercial fiction. Let me see, I've published one collection of short stories myself called Golden Hour. And then with this lovely group, we've done the new Mythic. And I also recently had a story published, I guess, in the big issue.
Nice. And long time no see. Who are you, James?
I'm James Healy. I'm just happy to be here. Very busy at the moment, kind of with live stuff, but I'm a writer of horror and science fiction and a freelance editor as well.
Awesome.
Short and sweet.
That's the way to do it. All right. So, did we want to say very quickly what we've been watching? I actually had to think about what was the last thing I plugged on the podcast, because I couldn't remember the last thing. I think I told everyone that my household have been watching all of the Star Wars canon in chronological order. Turns out that's quite impossible to do, but we're doing our best to watch it in chronological order. It's very confusing. Like, we sit down and start a new show and I'm like, where in the timeline is this? And this is me, who I'm obsessed with Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. I can hold the entire Cosmere in my head. Star Wars still manages to throw me for a loop. I specifically wanted to give a shout out to The Bad Batch, if I haven't done that already. The Bad Batch is set after Order 66, for people who know what that means. And it is a specific set of clones who never quite fit in, now find themselves extra alienated. And it's a story of We've seen it before with The Last of Us and Mandalorian, actually, but they end up adopting a child. It's a bunch of dads adopt a child, and they have to work out how to dad. And it's actually super cute. I love it. They're running around the universe with this young girl who's actually a really cool character. And they never thought they would find themselves being dads. They were just soldiers. And then they're like, now we would all die for this child. And that is a rewarding trope every time I see it. So I highly recommend The Bad Batch. There's been 2 seasons of it so far on Disney Plus, and there is a 3rd season still coming. So get hype. It's great character work, really emotional, which is stuff I don't say about Star Wars very often. So, and I feel like you don't need the rest of the canon to be. You can just dive into The Bad Batch on its own, and you'll still have a good time.
That's cool.
What have you been watching, Phoenix?
Yeah. Well, big news. I finally finished Frankenstein. So that's a win. Got through a classic, which usually takes me a while because, sometimes they're a crawl. And then I've been watching Arcane on Netflix recently, and woof, I am just enjoying that. Every episode, I'm just like, that was so satisfying, so well done. Every single one is like a good movie. Every episode is like a good movie, like really good, full on. Animation's beautiful. Highly, highly, highly recommend.
I adored Arcane.
Mm-hmm.
Alex, what have you been reading, watching, consuming?
Yeah, I have been, as you said, Phoenix, sometimes the classics can be a crawl, and this is really no exception. This is the Witches of Eastwick by John Updike. I've read his first book. It's really good. I think it's called Run, Rabbit, Run. This one, not so much. It's like it's very, very sloggy, unnecessarily horny, and just... It sounds like it'd be really fun, but it's just not. It's just the prose is so purple. Maybe it's just not a good fit for me. Anyway, so I'm like at 20 pages through, like left of that, and I'm like, come on, you can do it. And I just get through like 1.5 pages. Oh god. But other than that, then I'm gonna start. I think I'm gonna rewatch Ghost in the Shell standalone complex.
Oh, so good.
Yeah, I saw that back in the day. Before I saw the original, well, like the movie, which was good, but standalone complex is amazing. Kind of foreshadowed like the idea of memes, which is really cool. Yeah, so that'll probably be the next thing I jump into, I think.
Oh, just as a masterclass in plotting the standalone complex.
So good. So good.
Okay, two quick things. Speaking of foreshadowing of memes, foreshadowing of GIFs. Anyone remember Weibo from Flubber? That she communicated in GIFs, and I just thought it was
what a deep cut. Yes.
Yeah, I just thought I'd throw that out because it's something I think about every now and then. Two, another, just this is derailing, but anyway, I would love to know where to start in Ghost in the Shell because I have a lot of interest there, but there are a lot of different spin-off things. We could jump back to that.
The movie's a good place to start. That like gives you a big over. I did
see that.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, I don't think it's as good as the standalone complex personally. I think there's a second series, but I haven't seen that. But I think the standalone complex is the best. Like at least the first season that I've seen.
Yeah, the second season holds up. So there's 2 seasons. Are there 3 seasons? No, there's 3. Oh, yeah, all are good. All are very good.
Okay.
The quality doesn't.
Excellent.
That's great, though. Fantastic.
And James, what have you been consuming?
I recently picked up Prophet Song by Paul Lynch, an Irish author. I'm still fairly near the beginning of it, but it seems to be set in Ireland after Ireland has been taken over by some kind of subtle totalitarian, or they're being taken over by some kind of subtle totalitarian regime. But it's written in really, I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of like Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, where like there's no quotation marks. Some of the sentences are not grammatically correct. I'll just read the first 2 here to you. The night has come and she has not heard the knocking, standing at the window looking out onto the garden. How the dark gathers without sound the cherry trees. Like it doesn't quite make sense, but you get like a sense of what.
Wow.
Yeah. So I remember reading that first line and being like, "Oh, is that a typo or is that how it's meant to be?" But you get used to it pretty quickly. Really, really well written. Very subtle so far. It's kind of just about the husband is being kind of pressured by the police not to go on a march, and that's just what it's about so far. But you do get a sense of the kind of crawling sense of dread and a kind of sense of oppressive doom settling down upon them in a way that they can't really do anything about. So it's very, very, very good.
Ooh, love that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's dive into today's topic, NaNoWriMo, and getting ready for NaNoWriMo. So let me ask the obvious question. What is NaNoWriMo? Each of you, what have you heard of it? What have you absorbed? Have any of you participated in it? What does this word mean to you?
I've only participated in the periphery. I just kind of knew it as like in November, people set high writing goals of I think around 50,000 words usually or something like that. So I was like, well, I'll just use it as a time to set my own personal goal and see if I reach it and stuff. I haven't had like great success with reaching the goals that I set, but I appreciate the energy. And I did a little bit of Googling before this recording, and yeah, I understand now that there's like a global community around it, and you can set up regional writing cells or whatever you want to call them and cheer each other on.
A lot of cheering. Alex has put his glasses on, so I think that means he's ready to answer.
I am recently partially disabled, apparently. No, it's fine.
Your first cyborg upgrade. Well done.
That's right. I'm just spotting right into the future. It's great. Yeah, no, I'd heard sort of much the same thing. I've never really participated in it because it's just too much for me on a consistent. I can write 2,500 words of a day sometimes, but I'm very much a slow and steady wins the race. But like Phoenix, I've got a project that I am really looking to get done by November and writing about 1,000 words a pop, like a day. And I'm, pretty much looking to slot NaNoWriMo in for my reason to get that completed. So probably not the stretch goals that are at the top of it, but yeah.
That's incredible. And I also think you're being quite humble, Alex. I think you're a bit of a workhorse. The words pour out of you pretty quick.
Says you.
Exactly. I have an authority on it. All right. And James, how have you heard of NaNoWriMo in the past?
Yeah, I had it introduced to me in a kind of novel writing group that I was in, and we all kind of decided to join it, and we all got kind of really geared up for it, and kind of beat it out. I don't think any of us kept it up at all for even a week. I was always in the periphery. I always kind of knew about it after that. And it was a few years ago, I joined up and I went in and I signed and everything, and they have you, you've got a goals box and you can come in and set what you think your goal for each day will be. And are you going to try to get the ultimate 50,000 words? And I've got a great little care package that you can download. I still have it on my old computer, which just brings you through kind of basic character development, plotting, all this different stuff, different approaches to Snowflake method, and loads of different approaches towards writing. So it's a great it's like starter's tool for gearing up to writing a story or gearing up to writing a novel. But I've never actually decided to sit down and do like 50,000. I just don't think it's the way that I work at all. But yeah, it seems like a great idea and a great community. They've got an online Discord and everything where you can either do the local area or you can go into the main one and you can just chat with other people who are trying to work through their story problems as well at the same time. So it's quite a nice community.
Yeah, no, I experienced it. When did I first give it a crack? I want to say 2016, stumbled across it and I'm like, yeah, no, I can do this. And I remember starting off really well. I was hitting my word count goals each day. And then halfway through the month of November, we had to move house. Yeah. And that did derail my momentum somewhat. Though I do have this memory of we had been packing and the house is like half packed down. Like there's no furniture to sit on. And I'm like, I've got an hour, and I bust out my little laptop and I just sit in a room upstairs and I'm getting words out. And I still remember that's kind of what's special about NaNoWriMo is even in the madness and under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have interrupted packing down a house to write, but I'm like, no, I've got to do my 1.6K words today. It was almost that manic energy at that point. So I carved out an excuse to do it. So I the first time I tried NaNoWriMo, didn't hit the 50K goal. That is the traditional goal, writing 50K words in a month. But obviously it's evolved into a beast where if you sign into the website, you set your own goal and you're like, 20K, 30K is much more realistic for me. So you do have control over what your own goal is. But I think the broad framework is the typical 50K in a month, and it is starting a new idea, I think is the spirit of it. Again, obviously, these are more like guidelines than actual rules. The second time I gave it a go was a couple of years later, and I'm like, all right, here we go. I've shaken off cobwebs at first. It was maybe the next year, maybe the next November. And yeah, I was posting my word count goals. There was just a lot of satisfaction after each session going into the website, like adding my word count to it, watching the little bar tick up, just gamifying the whole experience. And I was also posting it onto my personal socials, being like, I wrote this many words a day. And it felt like screaming into the void a little bit. But say towards the end of the month, I had people just in the wild being like, hey, I've been seeing you posting all your word count goals. That's really cool to see. Well done. That's kind of motivating me to get back into it. And I'm like, well, there is this subtle knock-on effect of people absorbing the energy of just sharing goals and achieving word count goals. And I'm proud to say that second year I did achieve it.
Wow.
I hit 50K in the month.
Well done.
So just being able to say, yeah, I did NaNoWriMo. I haven't done it since. Every other November the stars have not aligned. It has not been a good November for me to dedicate to a project in that time of year, unfortunately. Usually the March is like a sweet spot for me to start a heavy project like that, but not November recently. So we've started touching on them, but the benefits of NaNoWriMo. So we've mentioned kind of that community, and I wanted to throw this over to you guys because we do this a little bit organically ourselves, which I kind of love. We have a little group chat amongst ourselves that if we have a good writing morning, we share word count goals.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll just pry you guys for information how that encouraging any sense of community, benefits you.
I would say the first thing that I think from that is I actually didn't know you'd done that 50,000 words in a month, and that's incredible because I've never done that. So
it really is.
The value of doing that is that, like, no matter what the quality of the words and you know how good or how bad they were, once you've done that, and that's basically writing a novel. And the power of that benchmarking that you've done, and you can say, well, I wrote 50,000 words in is so powerful to someone who wants to be a writer, because the hardest thing is always getting to the end of that book first. Certainly for me, it's like getting to that point. So that's easily a novella, like probably a short book, really, 50,000 words. And you can tell yourself, well, if I wrote 50,000, I can probably write another 20,000 to just finish it off. So it's this sense of benchmarking and being like, I've done this, I can do this again. And I think that's so hugely powerful.
Yeah.
So yeah, if nothing else, I think that's really, really amazing.
Yeah. No, it's kind of, I know it helps me a lot in the groups, because sometimes if I'm in a period of not writing as much, and then suddenly Matan's coming in with like these word counts, or Alex are coming in with these word counts, and I notice like some consistency there, I have this little bit, it's like, dang it, I gotta start writing again. And then when I start getting those word counts, that momentum going, I get really excited to be like 1,000 a day and like throwing it in the group, and I'm just like, yeah. And I don't know. Yeah, it definitely keeps me going. And one thing that also keeps me going is Cypress, Ali, your book. When you knocked out your first draft of that book, that is still an inspiration to me, because every now and then I think back to that. I was like, she wrote that first draft in like 3 months or something like that. I don't even know how long it was,
about
but
that,
it was. So I was like, I can do this. Like, it feels like that moment in the first Iron Man movie where, it's an unfortunate scene, but the main antagonist is yelling at one of the scientists. It was like, what do you mean you can't do this? Tony Stark did this like in a cave with scraps. And then he's like, whatever. I don't know. I think it kind of feels like that.
You get that put up
Halle
on a
Burnham
wall.
did this in 3 months. I had over a year.
I think, yeah, what you're both saying are this idea that it's like once you prove it to yourself, you're kind of like, yeah, even if the writing's crap. And kind of that's the point of NaNoWriMo. It's about turning off the editor brain. It's turning off the judgment brain. We're just measuring output.
Yeah.
And just being able to prove that you can get that much out. And then you're like, I can now do that whenever I want. It's and getting over that benchmark. And the beautiful thing is you end the month with more words than you started the month with. Again, you may have to go back and edit them, but these words didn't exist. And now they exist. Same question to you, James, though. Do you find the cheerleading motivational helps you?
Definitely, absolutely. I also think it's really useful having that motivation to find somewhere in your day that you can carve out, and you can get consistent with that. Then you kind of know, like, that's where that would fit, like, at any time. You kind of know you can find an hour here or there, and if you can keep that up for a month, then that'll become kind of a consistent place where you're like, well, now this is when I write, and also I know that I can write at this point, which I think is really, really useful, because that's something that can help you be consistent like even after that project has ended, when you want to step back into it, even just for writing for yourself or even finding time to edit and stuff, you've kind of found that block in your day or in your week or whatever it is. So yeah, it's massively useful.
Well, off the back of that, I'll ask specifics then. So for you, James, when do you carve out that time? When does it work with your schedule?
So at the moment, I have no time, but before, when I was writing last, it was, I had about an hour and a half in between work and training. When I would sit down in a cafe, take out the iPad, and just, no matter how tired I was, or no matter how much I wasn't feeling it, I was like, just for an hour, I was going to put words down. And you often find either within that hour, you strike gold and something really works, or you just have to break through there's a certain amount of like, oh, I know the characters are just doing this, just doing this. Then you'll hit on something and be like, oh, I hadn't realized that would be a character's motivation in this moment, or oh, I hadn't realized the character would react that way. And then you pursue that for the next 20 minutes, whatever amount of time it is. It's usually pretty good. So something comes out of it at the end that you can use at least. So that's always good.
And do you have a sense of how many words you would write in those hour sessions?
I think my target was 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'd usually hit 1,000 or a little bit over. I think if it was 2,000, no, I don't think I ever had 2,000. I think it was about 1,000 or 1,500
Nice.
thereabouts in that hour and a half. Yeah.
Very good. Same question to you, Phoenix. When do you carve out your writing time?
It moves a little bit, but it's almost always in the morning, and I try to do it before I do anything else. If I'm going to be writing that day, I do it first thing before, and it's a discipline to like, I sit down on my computer and it's a little tempting to go and check email or go and check messages or whatever. But even before I do any of that, like just before I kind of let anything else into my mind and start kind of taking hold of little like threads of things I need to do that day, try to go into writing then. So it moves a little bit, but it's always the first thing I do. And I always set a timer for an hour, and then it's whatever I can do in that hour. And recently I haven't even been putting words on the page. I've just been sitting there with a journal, because I've been doing more like plot exploration really and character motivation exploration. So no words technically in the story, but like my journal is practically full now, because I've just been like stream of consciousness exploring some things like that. But yeah, in the morning. I also find I'm more creative in the morning. Like I kind of feel that everything feels quieter.
When you are first drafting, what do you have a sense of what your typical word count is in an hour?
Yeah, it's usually somewhere between 700 words and 1,000 something like that.
Beautiful. Yeah. And Alex, when do you carve out your writing time?
So I usually do it first thing in the morning. I'm a very, very list focused person because I get distracted very, very easily. So I'll show you this is what I had from yesterday. I've got all my little things there. You can't really see it, but it's like practice like guitar solo, do some flyers. So that's always the first thing. So I do that, and I've got a little checkbox that I can tick off to give myself that little dopamine hit. I will do that first thing in the morning. Now, recently, what I've been doing is changing it up a little bit and doing it in sprints. And I'll do 2 times 25-minute sprints, and it's a good opportunity to sort of do a little reset. So yesterday I did it, and the first sprint was like 600 words or 700 words, something like that. And then you look at it and you go, wow, that was only 25 minutes. I just blew through that. Sometimes you'll do 25 and you'll get 300 and you'll be like, this is rubbish. I hate it, and throw your computer on the ground. But yeah, always first thing in the morning. If I don't do it first thing in the morning, it might get done. But if I do it first thing in the morning, it will get done, because it's important for me to keep that consistency, especially with the sort of novel project I'm doing right now. It's a pretty high priority. So yeah, first thing is always the way to do it. And as to your second question, how much I usually write, yeah, it tends to be around that 700 to 1,000 mark. I used to be setting myself word count goals of 500, but I found that I didn't really break escape velocity much if I only did 500. It was kind of like just when I'm starting to get into the zone, so that's when I started doing the sprints, and that's been pretty effective. And that's just one of those techniques that I think I'll cycle through, and then I might change to like going to the end of the chapter or something in a couple of months, or yeah.
I love that. For my own 2 cents, I'm now a morning writer as well. I didn't used to be. So when I was more freelance and had control over my time, that 10 a.m., 11 a.m. was a sweet spot. But then I went and got a job. So I'm like, I'm going to have to wake up before and write in the morning. And that morning brain, as you've both said, I found best to tap into. I would really struggle to write after, like at the end of the day, once the sun's down and the brain is now also down. So taking advantage of that morning brain, I thankfully can easily carve out maybe a 2-hour block for myself of a morning. The Labrador knows to put herself back to bed because Ali's going to be ignoring her for those 2 hours. She gets fed and then she goes back to sleep. In about an hour, I feel like a bad hour for me is 500 words. That's if I haven't been writing for a while. It's a real struggle. I'll be lucky to get 500. A good hour for me, I can probably hit 2K. So it pendulums between that, I think. And the difference between what I'm calling a good morning hour and a bad one is if I have a routine. So I haven't written for about a month myself because I have been insanely busy. And by writing, I mean first drafting. I do split the hairs between editing and then, as you've said, Phoenix, plotting. I'm like, that's a different brain, that's a different exercise. But writing, just that first draft, getting words down, I haven't done that in about a month. So I'm giving myself permission for that to be a real struggle when I get back to it. So if I do an hour session, giving myself permission it'll probably be only about 500 words, and that's okay. I only have those excellent 2,000 word ones if I'm, say, 2 weeks into a really repetitive routine that I've been doing it at that same time every day. I'll ask you all to speak to that. How does habit inform your progress, making the words flow easier?
Yeah, I think that's a huge part. I read quite a few writer biographies, and one that always comes to mind is, of course, the granddaddy of horror, Stephen King. He says he taps out at about 2,000 words a day, but he's very adamant about writing every day. He writes on Christmas, he writes on his birthday, and that's how he's able to get that. It's a muscle. Like, it just sounds so mundane and boring, but it's 100% a muscle. You're flexing a brain muscle. If you don't use that muscle to the full extent, if you don't do the full extension of the curl, you don't get the rewards. You might, do a PB one day and go, oh, I got 2,500 words in 3 hours. That's great. But yeah, if you don't have that consistency, and I'm writing about 1,000 words a day, and it's starting to get kind of easy. I haven't done it today because, we're sort of doing this, so I might jump into it later. But yeah, the more you do, the more you get back. Use it or lose it. I can 100% concede to that being a thing.
It's for me, it's like a believing in myself sort of thing. It's like I've been really showing up this week, so it's like I kind of feel like it's that momentum thing. And if I have that momentum behind me, it's way like I did it. I did another hour today, and it just makes, I don't know, it's motivational for myself, as well as I like what you said, Alex, a little bit ago, where you said I have a novel project that's a priority right now. And just the fact that it's a priority for you, like making it a priority is a cool thing. And I'm going to start saying that now about my novel, because it is. I just haven't said that before. But that's a big thing for me, as well as kind of on the topic of consistency is I have been freelancing for a while now. So one thing I've gotten very good at is like self-motivational concentration. Like the project does not get done unless I'm getting it done. So I've gotten very good at I use Pomodoro, and what I do is 50 minutes working, 10 minutes break. And I've gotten very good at doing that, 50 minutes full concentration, 10 minutes break. And so then one day, a while ago, I had a day where I did not have an editing project on. I had a full day. I'm like, today, full writing day. It's a writing day. And it was so cool to see that I could just copy and paste writing into that slot and just 4 hours straight writing, no problem. Nice. And it was not a problem at all for me.
Oh, that's
50 minutes going, 50 minutes going, 10 minutes off. I almost did 3,500 words that day. And I was like, nice. In between two different stories too. It was very look at that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I was very proud of myself.
And James, as someone who's had their routine interrupted, how do you find habit forming for your writing?
I don't know. When I'm thinking back, I'm thinking when I had specific habits and I had time, I often wrote really well and was able to come back and write an awful lot. But I think another thing that happens, it's kind of is it a chicken or the egg thing? when I'm in that zone, I'm really, really hungry to come back to the story. So I don't know
Mm.
if I end up forming a habit simply because I'm so keen to get back to the story, and that kind of takes up a larger amount of my time than it ordinarily would, or if having that habit and that time to write gets me to a certain point where I become really interested in the story. So I don't know. I don't think I'm someone who naturally is habit forming with regards to my writing. So I don't know if I can really speak to that one as much.
Mm. I love that we're naturally talking about being in the zone, and Alex used the phrase escape velocity. So in my previous creativity podcast, what we're doing, I talk about this idea of the lull and the brain activity and what exactly the brain does when we are in that high creativity mode. And I'll just do the briefest recap, but it's this idea that, say, if there's different wave when they measure creatives when they're creating and when they're in the zone and the words are flowing and it's really happening, they measured that, say it's just really high waves up the top of this graph. And then what everyday brain waves look like is it's kind of in the middle of the graph. Every day we would describe as probably when we're at work, when we're talking to people, we would be in that zone now as we're interacting, communicating, sending emails, just middle band brain. And then there's a bottom band of brainwave, and that's very low thinking. That happens, say, in moments just before sleep or when you're doing something quite repetitive with your hands. For me, it was at the end of a work shift when I worked at a restaurant doing the dishes for about half an hour. It's also in the shower for me. It's also awkwardly when I'm driving, apparently. Driving triggers that kind of low
Yeah.
brainwave. It's repetitive. I'm just on autopilot a little bit. And the principle is, I'll remember the name, Nancy C. Andreessen is the name of the researcher, so you can look her up to get more information on this, but she posits that what they found after all that, the research they did, is the brain really struggles to go from middle wave to high wave thinking. And we probably experience this day to day. If we've been doing a task, we're in the middle of our stuff and we're like, all right, now I'm going to sit down and write. It's NaNoWriMo. I've now carved out this time to write, but I've been doing middle wave thinking all day. It's a struggle to get up into top wave thinking. What they found, what the brain actually loves to do, is it finds it much easier to leap up from bottom wave thinking into the high. This leap is easier than middle to high, bottom to high. The brain just loves that. So that explains that phenomenon of ideas coming at really awkward times, ideas coming when you're in the shower, in the moments before sleep. When driving, for me, very annoying that suddenly my characters will start nattering and I have dialogue I need to record. I'm interested if you've experienced this, Phoenix, because you weren't on the creativity podcast. Does that make sense to you when you hear that? Have you experienced that ideas at inconvenient times?
Yeah. But also just like, because I listened to the creativity episode. It was a really great episode, by the way. Great job. But I was just thinking now, because it's like, even just, it's a little bit different, but writing in the morning, it's easier because it's like, and I prevent myself from looking at emails and messages and things like that, because it does bring my brain into a different space. And I find that once, even just looking at like one email, it's way harder for me to get into a creative space. I really need to keep it clean slate. First thing I open is my story, go right into that. Right from, I have a yoga practice and a meditation practice and get ready for the day and then go right into that. And that's ideal for me. But showers, definitely for me. Driving, definitely for me. I remember driving to where I was taking classes one time, and I just had, I don't know, I was just in a daydream creating a video game in my mind the entire time. And I don't know, I had the best time doing that.
And that's that feeling that is quite addictive. I think both James and Alex called it addictive. It is that high brain. Like once we tick over into that, I think that's what we really love. That's the writing we love. We do the struggle bit because we are chasing that. We know if we just push through that block, we are going to get into that flow state where the words come easily. It's almost more voyeuristic what we're doing, in that we're just recording the story. At least that's how it feels for me. And so I think that's why we all keep doing what we're doing, because we've we've done it enough that we recognize the habit of being able to we can tick ourselves over into that space. So I guess the whole reason I'm talking about this in a NaNoWriMo podcast is you have your scheduling and setting your scheduling goals and where you can carve out this time. And as we've all talked about, it is an average for most people and writers that we can hit that 1000K in about an hour. Is fairly typical. And if you break down 50K over a month, it's only about 1.6K a day. And suddenly when you break it down into that small chunk, it's much more achievable. You're only talking about a 2-hour block at most, really, finding that time. Either you can do an hour here, an hour there, or carving out a full 2 hours. So if you're able to do that, you're easily on pace to achieve NaNoWriMo. And it's thinking about these tricks and tips of things you can do to marry up your creative thinking with the schedule that actually works for your life. So when you set those, I'm going to write in the morning or in my lunch break. So how can you're like, well, I would like my creative thinking, my high mode thinking to actually happen at that time. And it is that getting bored. It is going for a walk. It is doing yoga, as Phoenix said, anything that just slows the brain down. Because if you can get yourself into low mode thinking before you start writing, you have a much better chance of being able to shoot up. I use that term every time. Shoot up into high wave thinking and achieve the words are coming almost faster than you can keep up with. And then NaNoWriMo writes itself. But I think everyone will surprise themselves. All the listeners out there who want to give NaNoWriMo a go, you will surprise yourself about, as you continue to train this muscle, how it will feel easier and easier each day. Even if you don't do the whole month, if you can just do a week of every day for 7 days in a row, the difference between day 1 and day 7 is going to feel incredible.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I wanted to ask is about if you wanted to share a little bit about your family life and how the people around you respect your writing and how you communicate your writing time to them. I'm still eager to get our plus ones on a podcast. I'll push for that one day about what it's like living with a writer. But I've used this frame that a writer themselves doesn't do NaNoWriMo. A household does NaNoWriMo because you almost need to prioritize and communicate. I'm now going to be doing this thing for an hour and a half. I've made this important to me. And therefore, you're asking the people around you to also recognize that it is important and sacred and not to interrupt that. So I'll ask you, Phoenix, first. What's your household life like when you communicate with the people around you about your writing time?
So I live with my wife / partner, Jose, and it is just very much that, like, I do just communicate, like, all right, I'm going into, especially if we have been like talking a little bit, there's been a little bit of discourse or something, then I do like, all right, I'm going into focus time. I'm going into the zone. And that means I put on my headphones and I do just like no talking, and she respects that too. It's great. But so we moved to Spain about 6 months ago, and the nature of that and putting yourself into a new country and stuff is there are a lot of practical things you need to talk about. So there are moments where she needs to talk to me about something. And in those moments, it's that compromise of like, this is important, so I have to pull myself out. But it's such a jarring, like, what is it? We need to, okay, cool. And then I go back in. But it's like that, the smallest interruption can sometimes just like pull you off of that rail. And like when you're in it, and you kind of have to really respect that. But she's great about it. And we have it is just open communication. And I love, that's so true. It's not just you, it's the household is doing NaNoWriMo.
James, I know you've been in a couple of share houses. How do you navigate that kind of respect for writing time?
It usually was never too much of a problem in share houses because I think you could kind of state I'm working, or people were usually pretty respectful of that. Little bit something I found it personally kind of tricky within relationships, where I think people probably just didn't understand, or they kind of didn't appreciate. I do need a little bit of time to kind of do it to myself, or maybe it was how I communicated about it. Either way, it was always a point of tension and a point of conflict, which is probably why I'm no longer in those relationships. So yeah, it always has been a tricky thing, or a tricky time, or a tricky way of communicating, that you do need to just carve this little bit of time out for yourself. And then probably the reason I'm not writing at the moment is just because there's a lot of interruptions in the day. So it is difficult to find that time to kind of just get that time to do it. So yeah, it is a tricky thing to manage.
And how about you, Alex? It sounds like you've got a pretty good routine in the morning.
Yeah, well, Liz is currently she's baristing in Cremorne right now, so she gets up real early.
Wow, yeah.
So generally, I have the house to myself most days, and to be honest, she's a long sleeper. So even if she's not working, she'll be in bed till like 10 o'clock. So it's kind of fine, to be honest. But look, if she's up and I'm like, hey, I'm writing, she'll very rarely interrupt me doing it. Like sometimes she'll be like, hey, do you want something for dinner? And I'll be like, okay. No, but she's very good about it. But it just seems to sort of work out. She's very much an afternoon person, and I'm very much a morning person. So it's almost like ships in the night, which is kind of useful in that respect.
Yeah, no, that is very nice. I'll share my my anecdotes about my husband. He'll listen to this, so he'll find this funny / not funny. But when we were all living on top of each other in a smaller house when we were in Maroubra a couple of years ago, we didn't have offices. We only it was 2 bedrooms and then an open space. So our housemate had his bedroom was / an office. I'm thinking specifically of the first COVID lockdown. So then my husband and I, our bedroom became his office. He had to work from home on the computer in there. And then so the dining table in the shared space became my writing space. The 2 lads were good at respecting that, but I did have to make it very clear that if you come down into the kitchen and come down in the space, you're welcome to walk around, but please don't talk to me, because the moment you say something to me, you're going to throw me out of the momentum and the quiet that I've been trying to cultivate. I don't put headphones on. Listening to music doesn't help my writing process. I do. White noise is okay, but if I'm writing in a cafe, I will put, I have noise cancelling earphones now, but I will play static or white noise in the headphones to drown out kind of cafe noises, because sometimes I find the conversation on the table over too interesting, and even that's enough to throw me out.
Brain FM is a tool that I used to use, which is like, I don't know what the science is, but apparently there's some sort of brain synchronization thing. I used it for a while and it was very effective, and then I stopped. Not really sure why, but I should go back to that. It's one of those things I was like, oh yeah. But yeah, I found that very good. I think it's a paid tool. It's like 10, 12 bucks a month. But that's a really good, like, it's like ambient, or you can just do white noise, or, so that's a very good tool for like noise cancellation.
Yeah, no, I probably would have found something like that if I had to keep writing in a shared room like that. When I was hitting one really stressful deadline for Unsound, my film, and it was kind of like I needed to put many hours into it a day to hit the deadline, we had a hat system. It was literally just this, if I was wearing the hat, don't talk to me.
Oh my
But
gosh.
if I took the hat off, I'm just
this.
plodding around on emails. You can interrupt me. So it was literally, I had this visual cue. So I was writing with this hat on where I'm like, you guys, you can't talk to me.
That's amazing.
But then we moved house and now we all have our own offices, and that made it so much easier. Just thank God for sacred space. So it is that difference of privilege about where you are literally writing, if it is in an open shared space or if you have your own office. The other anecdote I'll share, because it's fun, is COVID lockdown the second. I did have an office, but my husband was also at home all day, and he's a lovely ADHD brain, and he knows and respects my writing so much, but ADHD brain will override this sometimes. And so I'll be writing in my office and he'll walk in, and then the dog follows him, and I've got a couch in the back of my office, and so they'll sit down and he'll be halfway through a conversation. Again, that's how his brain will work. So he'll just like keep the conversation he had in his head will continue on my couch, and I'm like, okay, I guess I'm not writing, I'm listening to this conversation. And then I will use it as an excuse for coffee. So I will get up, go to the kitchen, put on the kettle. He and the dog will both follow me out. The conversation will finish and end. And then I'll have my coffee ready, and I'll be like, great, I'll get back to it. And then I go back to the office and shut my door. And it became like a Pavlovian trade thing that would be my, keeping the relationship healthy, so I'm not snapping at him. But it was just every time he came
gosh.
into my space, that I would get up, leave the space, he would follow, and then I would come back.
I'm just imagining this little train of you and then
Yeah.
Nate and Sarah.
Yeah.
That's such a cute mental image. It's like, all right, let's go get coffee. Come on, everyone.
It's cute in hindsight, but at the time,
Maddening
my
in the
God.
moment.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Because there was no
This
lock
is-
on that door, and if I could have installed a lock on that door, I would have.
I always feel
Um,
that's the thing. I always feel like such an asshole because it's like, oh, here's my beautiful partner wanting to talk to me, and I have
Yeah.
to be all like, oh, what? I hate it, but it's the reality.
It is, because
Spending time with my imaginary friends. Please don't interrupt me.
it is that tension between, because we know the effort it takes to get into that brain space, that thinking space in the zone. And we love, like, the endorphins we get from being in the zone. So the moment something interrupts that, even if it is the person we love the most in the world, it is going to send us for a little bit of an emotional, a little bit of a kick. So that's why I would love to get all of them on the podcast, so they can have the right of defense speak to what it's like being on the other side of that.
Yeah.
All right. So we're kind of nearing the end of the podcast. I wanted to end with a little bit of perhaps a loose structure, is how I ended my workshop that I did the other day about getting people NaNoWriMo-ready. We've talked again about the difference between planners and pantsers. I think I'm surrounded by pantsers. That's fine.
I'm a hybrid.
You're a hybrid. That's right.
I'm getting towards planning bits now.
You've changed over time slightly. You're doing more.
Yeah,
He has his,
evolving.
look at his glasses.
Yeah. See, the changed man. I'm far more sophisticated now.
And are you still a sworn pantser, James?
No, I think I'd be leaning into, I think I need to do kind of a little bit of planning so that there's a rough structure. But I did find for the one time that I got really geared up for NaNoWriMo, I planned the whole thing out. And then all of my interest evaporated immediately.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, can't do that again.
Yeah.
There needs to be a certain amount of discovery still for me to go hard at.
I feel like NaNoWriMo inherently favors the pantser a little bit, because it is just words on a page is how we're measuring success here. It doesn't matter if it's an incoherent mess at the end. That's not the point. You've achieved word count routine.
Yeah.
But for the souls in my workshop the other night who were frightened by the idea and get writer's block from the blank page, they're like, I need a plan. I need to know where I'm going if I'm even going to attempt that many words. Because you don't want to stop and plan the next bit before you have to write each day. Like if you're jumping from planning brain to writing brain, I feel like that's almost at least for me, would be an impossible task, switching between the two constantly every day. Suddenly we're talking about, I would need to carve out 4-hour blocks out of my day to achieve that. So for people who plan like me, I would recommend before November starts, having the loose roadmap of what you want to write, what your 50K is, even before starting. And how I broke it down for all of them was, so say a 50K is not quite a full book. If a commercial book is somewhere between that 60 to 80K, you're not going to quite hit your ending even at the end of the month. So I'll just quickly rattle through the little slide I have in front of me. I recommended so I'm using Save the Cat. I know we've talked about Save the Cat on the podcast before. It's a very loose structure tool. There's many different structure tools out there, but I think this one works really well because of how loose it is. Save the Cat talks about an opening image. In a book form, we can think of this as the first page, the first taste, and the logic being, if you have an opening image, whatever your final image of your story, of your movie is going to be, is almost going to be a mirror of that. Think about what the two sides of your coin is. If whatever your journey is going to be, here's what it is at the start, here is what it is at the end. So if it's having a little bit of think about the opening image, the state of what it is. It's about 650 words. So this is me literally mapping 50K against percentage marks you're meant to be hitting these road markers. So that's about 650 words. So you'll be achieving that opening image your first day of writing, because it's less than the 1.6K mark. Save the Cat talks about theme stated. What that means is in a movie, because movies aren't as sophisticated as books, they're a bit more formulaic. Say if your character at the start goes, I believe in this, and they're talking to another character in a cafe and they go, is that true? And they're like, yeah. It's the conversation where you manage to pluck out of your characters what their current view of the world is. And it ultimately is going to be the view that is challenged throughout the entire story. In books, there's a more sophisticated way of doing this, but essentially you're going to be presenting the worldview that the events of the story will challenge. Either it'll be still proven correct by the end or will be proven wrong. I have about 3K, and around the day 2 mark, you'll be playing in whatever scene interrogates this theme. The setup, you've got about 6.3, by the end of 6.3K words, which is around your day 4 mark, is the setup. The setup is the very typical who, what, where, when, establishing status quo. So you've got about 6K words to get that all on the page, whatever scenes you have that are introducing your main characters, your environment, who all the main players are, the chess pieces. Save the Cat then talks about catalyst. I would say around day 5 mark, you're hitting catalyst at about the 7.5K mark. Catalyst is another word for inciting incident. You've set up the status quo. What's the thing that comes and interrupts it and unsettles it, smashes it up?
Mm-hmm.
And then around day 9 of November, debate. It talks about this. Debate isn't as frequent in other story structures. I kind of love it that Save the Cat actually spends this much time on debate. It says around the 15K word mark, you will reach the end of debate. Debate is almost refusal of the call, would be what it is in your hero's journey equivalent. It is the catalyst has happened and your hero goes, I don't know if I'm up for this. I don't know if I can do this. What are we going to do? It's the uncertainty and the discussion around how to deal with what has just happened. Around the day 12 mark of November, you will be around the end of fun and games. Fun and games is a very movie term. It's around the 19K mark of words. You'll reach the end of fun and games. I think of fun and games as your trailer moments. So if it's the promise of your story, if you're a rom-com or you have a cat and mouse situation, all the fun things that is the whole reason someone picked up the book is going to be happening in this portion of the story. It's
the Spider-Man crime fighting success.
Yes, he's
moment.
come into his own. He's wearing a suit by now. He's decided he's going to embrace it. He's going to be catching his first bad guys and throwing quips around. We're in fun and games.
Mm-hmm.
And then around day 20, you should be hitting your midpoint of your story. So this is where it's a bit confusing, because the middle of November, you won't be hitting midpoint. Around November 20th, you want to be hitting the midpoint. It's about 35K mark, roughly. And more these days, I'm appreciating how important the midpoint is and thinking more and more about midpoint and structuring my stories around midpoint. This idea that first half and second half need to have fundamental different theses. They need to be doing something needs to flip that can't be undone. I've been thinking more and more about the importance of a midpoint. And then by day 28, we're now really at the end of November, you've had about 47,500 words you'll be at around this point on day 28. And this section is called Bad Guys Close In. Essentially, after the midpoint, tension. It's all about, tension and danger ramping up. Things are looking dire. Things are looking bad. The stakes are raising, all that good stuff. And by about day 30, right at the end, when you're hitting the 50K word mark, is that all is lost moment. So it's not the end of your story, but you'll be hitting the end of your characters pretty much their most devastating lowest moment, where they don't think they can succeed. If it's the kind of story where someone's died, this is where it happens. It's the thing they don't think they can come back from. It's pretty much where you'll be ending NaNoWriMo. So hopefully that's a really exciting part of the story to hit. So then it's just on to you to finish the story after that. So what are your reactions to that? I don't know if you guys have read Save the Cat and how that structure sits or feels organic to all of you.
I haven't read Save the Cat. It was quite an experience to hear a book broken up like that, because it always feels like this kind of amorphous thing where you just like go in and you put time in, and eventually obviously there are tools and things like that, but to hear it broken down by word count is like, whoa, I've never thought about it like that. It felt very like clinical. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I could work with this. But it's also very cool to it also is very helpful to hear it broken down like that, especially in terms of like planning and kind of if you're going in where to start, and not to think about like getting to the end necessarily, but you just kind of have to plan that first climb and then maybe the drop off at the end a little bit. You don't have to do a whole book. That's nice to know.
Yeah, it's good hearing that read out and thinking about the book that I'm doing now and going like, oh yeah, I know where that bit goes. I know, oh yeah, definitely think of that, where that bit's going to go. And hearing it laid out in sort of those kind of terms. Yeah, like you said, I think some things you could sub out for certain other, but yeah, it's a good general thesis to follow, especially if you're like, I don't know how a story works. I've seen movies, but I don't know what's going on. I think you could do a lot worse than having those rails to at least compare notes with.
Yes.
Especially if you are intimidated by a blank page. It's like, okay, we'll start thinking about this and then see where you go. It's a great jump off point.
Yeah, does something like for you, James, does that feel like prohibitive or helpful?
Yeah, I don't know. They're probably prohibitive. Yeah, I'm thinking of the story that I have been writing, and I'm like, do they fit in there? I'm like, yeah, I kind of feel like this goes there, I can move that around and stuff. But yeah, I feel like if I am trying to write to hit beats, it doesn't feel organic. I feel like for a first draft, I'd rather do it organically, and then I can move things around and shift things so that they do hit those beats in the right places. But if I feel like I'm writing towards something, it starts to feel like, no, it doesn't make sense that I'm making the characters go here and stuff. I prefer to, when you do it the other way, you can put a point where like you understand the world well enough, you understand the characters well enough, and you're sort of just watching the dominoes fall. And I think someone said it's kind of voyeuristic. You do sort of feel like you're just sitting back being like, oh no, that's going to end in catastrophe for you. Like, and I'm just writing about it. I'd rather get into that place. But I do like the idea of NaNoWriMo ending on the kind of lowest point, because that's kind of a really exciting place to, once you've stepped away from it, you're so likely to come back when you've left it there, because you're like, how's the character now going to get to the end of the story? So it's a great place to end it. Like, I think that's brilliant. It's like reinforcing its motivation again.
No, I find that so fascinating, talking to pantsers who look at us as something that clinical and go, oh, that'll ruin it for me. Well, I'm like, I need that in place before I could even start, because I know I'm already an overwriter. And if I didn't have a plan, I would write. Like, sure, I could sit down and do many, many words a day, but I would just get nowhere. And it would be probably words I would never be able to use. So I'm comforted and motivated by hard rails like that. Yes, I'm definitely a white page will block me more so than structure will block me.
It's interesting, Ali, that you say that you'll write and you'll write and you'll just write around and be like, oh, I can't use any of this stuff. Where I think maybe, and I might be misinterpreting this, but I think maybe the pantser mindset is more like, how am I going to get all these words? And you're like, what am I going to do with all these words? Like, for me, it's never like, oh, I'm going to write too many words and I won't know what to do with them. It's like, oh, what goes where? What do I, how do I like maximize what I'm sort of doing here? So I don't know, maybe that's the difference between the planner and the pantser mentality.
It's fascinating, because I've told you all how the first draft of Majesty was like over 200K. Like, it was something stupid. And that's because I pantsed it. And I'm like, never again. Never again. Because editing it down into something sensible was just was more work than it was worth, almost. So I'm definitely I need to write to keep myself in check.
Mm.
Well, that feels like a natural ending. We've hit the all is lost moment. So we'll have to come back next week to crawl out of this hole. This has been Pros and Cons. I hope you're all super motivated to start your NaNoWriMo journey. A little plug from us for all the fans of Patrick Rothfuss out there, which I am a fan of, despite all the things I've ever said on this podcast. I'm a Patrick Rothfuss fan. He held a Twitch stream the other day with Rupert Degas and another audiobook reader of his. He's got a short story coming out, releasing very soon, I believe, set on the character of Bast from his Kingkiller books. And while promoting that, Rupert, who did the voice of the Stolen Sword in the new Mythic, gave the new Mythic a plug on that Twitch stream. Oh,
Yeah.
Very cool. It was very
So
cool and
cool.
lovely. So I recommend you check out, here's an equal shout out. Check out Patrick Rothfuss's stuff. Check out his new book, and Rupert narrated it. And Rupert has also narrated one of the 6 stories in the new Mythic. You can find us on Amazon. Give us a review on Goodreads. And also, whatever listening app you're using for this podcast, give the podcast a review, because that helps us with algorithms. And we're very excited to get our audiobook to you before Christmas. We will finish today's episode with a quote that I believe Alex has sourced for us.
I have indeed. The quote is, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." And that is by Maya Angelou, American poet and civil rights activist known for Why the Caged Bird Sings.
Beautiful. Oh, well, I want everyone to get over their agony and get it out of themselves.
Yeah.
Release your own caged bird, let it sing, get it on the paper.
So this has been Ali, Phoenix, Alex, and James, and we'll see you next week.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.